Greetings and welcome to Let's Talk About Books, baby, where we talk with your favorite LGBTQ plus author. I'm Anita Kelly, and my guest today is Elisabeth Nonas. Hello, Elisabeth.
Hello, Anita. I am so happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you here. This is our first meeting.
Our first meeting ever, yes.
Yeah, it's great. You have or have had a new book that came out this year, right?
Correct, in April.
In April, and it was called, or it is called, Grace Period.
It is.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? About Grace
I
Period?
can. I absolutely can.
Wonderful.
It is about Hannah, who has just retired from teaching and at the college level, and as she is walking into her retirement party, she is called away because her wife of 25 years, Grace, has been in what turns out to be a fatal car accident. So she's called to the ER, and Grace dies.
Wow.
And Hannah is left to figure out what happens next. She wasn't sure what she was going to do in her retirement, but Grace, who was also a professor, was going to be on sabbatical for a year. So Hannah was going to have time to figure out what she was going to do. And this was certainly not part of the plan because Grace was 10 years younger than Hannah. So instead of figuring out what she's going to do in her retirement, she has to grapple with this new and unexpected turn her life has taken.
Wow. That is quite a read. Hannah not only is dealing with a predicted change, major life change, but also at the same time has this unpredicted life change that
absolutely was not at all part of the plan.
Yeah. So the protagonists are Hannah and maybe Grace.
Well, yes, and we do because the book opens at Grace's funeral. Mm-hmm. So we know Grace has died, but we do, over the course of the story, learn about who Grace was, what the relationship was like.
Okay. And is that how you got the title, Grace Period? Is it about...
If it were that easy, that would have been great, but so this is my fourth published novel.
Okay.
And I have a fifth one that will never see the light of day that came between three and this one. But I always title whatever I'm writing, whether I was writing a screenplay or a short story or a novel, because I find titles very useful and they kind of steer me back if I get off track or if I get stuck, which does happen. Mm-hmm. And the title kind of reminds me what my story is about. And Grace Period, I think, is actually the third title I had for this.
Really?
I think, because originally it was called, I can't remember which was first. It might have been called B&B, as in bed and breakfast, mm-hmm. Because it was always going to be about Hannah and Grace and dead Grace. And in one incarnation, I actually first envisioned it as an interactive website. Boy, I didn't know I was going to be talking about this. So this was always going to be the story, and I was going to write their story. And what Grace was going to end up doing was turn their house into a B&B.
Okay.
Which that is not a spoiler alert because never happens.
Doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen.
You took a turn of
And
events.
then, yeah. So then it was going to be called Lesson Plan, but because they were both teachers, but I thought lesson plan sounded too high school
Okay.
or middle school.
Okay.
It didn't sound
adult enough.
Yeah. And then at some point it became Grace Period, or maybe it was going to be called Hey Grace, because that's how they sort of sometimes would communicate with each other.
Oh, I love the name Grace Period though, because
me too.
Yeah.
I was very happy when I landed on it.
Yeah, I mean it really is simple, yet it describes it all.
It does. It does.
Yeah,
and it could be. Somebody asked me if it was Grace with the punctuation mark, period, and I said no, but you know.
Okay. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, neither had I.
How about that? So, how has Grace Period been received?
Well, that's a really good question. I got some very favorable blurbs when I sent it to early readers. And there haven't been a tremendous number of reviews, but or at least that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And I did get one very favorable review with somebody who really understood what I was going for and what the book was about. So that was very gratifying. And people who have read it and told me their responses quite like it, and they're surprised that it's funny.
Yeah.
Because the cover has this big urn on it, and sometimes when I showed that to people, they go, "Oh." I said, "No, you'll laugh, you'll cry. You're going to enjoy it." And somebody that I don't know, but who knew a relative of mine and emailed and asked me if I was related to this person, must have seen the link to the book on my email. And she's in her 80s, and her husband died a few years ago. And she wrote me a beautiful email telling her how much the book had helped her.
Aww.
In her grieving process.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. So
nice.
If that was the only response I ever got, that would be great.
Heck yeah. That's enough, right?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. So, you hadn't planned, I guess, you never plan on hearing something like that, you write a book and you're thinking you're going to entertain people, but that's like icing on the cake.
Right.
Yeah, that's nice. And so you said that you have a non-published book that's in between the third and this one,
right,
and it's going to remain non-published.
Yep.
So you're not happy with that one, I take it.
I haven't looked at it for a number of years, but I wrote it. It was not. I love reading mysteries, and it wasn't really a whodunit, but more of a why done it, and it sort of isn't really a mystery, and I don't know if it really works as a novel. And I wrote it as this. I wrote a draft of the novel, and then I wrote it as a screenplay because it had some structural issues, and you can't mess with structure in a screenplay. So I knew that would fix could solve some of the problems. And then I rewrote the novel based on my screenplay. So I
Oh,
spent a lot of time working on the book, but uh, here we are talking about Grace Period.
okay. Okay. Got it.
No, no, no. If any writers are listening, no writing is wasted.
It's true. It's true. It's all
Mm-hmm.
a good lesson, right?
Right.
And
I wasn't sure what the lesson was, but it's not wasn't wasted.
speaking of lessons, um, were you a teacher at one point?
I taught screenwriting and writing for emerging media at Ithaca College for about 25 years.
Wow.
And I taught some fiction writing when I lived in LA.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. So, what do you like about teaching?
The students,
Great. Great answer.
I really did. I mean, I retired at the end of the fall semester of 2019, so I missed the pandemic semester
Yeah.
and the following ones. But I really liked teaching what I taught, which started as screenwriting, and then sort of branched out into what, for a better term, we called emerging media, which could be video games, theme parks, escape rooms, any kind of or environmental storytelling, um, any ways that narrative is delivered.
Wow. That is all encompassing. I didn't realize that.
Well, it's sort of where the story was going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So you're
it
no
was kind of
longer.
exciting.
Yeah. It does sound exciting. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Ithaca College it's a beautiful setting up there.
It's where I'm not at Ithaca College, but I am in Ithaca, New York.
Are you?
I am.
Oh, awesome! I love Ithaca. Um, that's where Moosehead is. Moosewood.
Moosewood.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Moosewood is in the book.
Is it?
It is.
Ah, okay. I'm gonna definitely check that out. I have not read Grace Period yet, but I will. It's on my
You'll laugh, you'll
list.
cry.
Uh, and it's what genre would you say would it fall into?
Well, it's fiction. I mean, it's not romance. Um, it's
Contemporary.
contemporary.
Okay. Okay. You had talked about writing a mystery, so that's what made me wonder if
Yeah.
there was a that aspect to it. But it's okay, and
No, it is. It really is about Hannah and figuring out what her life is and even who she is at this point. I mean, I've always written about how lesbians form community and family. I
mm-hmm.
mean, that's what my first three books were about. And kind of describe it as, I mean, this is sort of still my theme. And it's like it's aged along with me. And, this is what's like death, the final frontier.
mm.
But it really is about, I think it's a positive book. and it's about survival
Yeah.
and and learning how to move on.
Moving through grief.
Yep, which is not linear.
No. Nope. Not at all.
Yep. So Hannah learns a lot in this process, and um, each book I've written has presents its own problems, and I think what was a challenge at the beginning writing this, because it starts pretty soon after Grace has died, and Hannah is in terrible shape, basically, and she has to do a certain amount of thinking and feeling and being sad. And as I said, I love reading mysteries, so I'm used to stories that move.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking, well, she's not moving.
Mm-hmm.
she's just sitting here.
Yeah.
Um, and also coming from screenwriting where you have dialogue and you have action, and that's really all you have. You don't have any of the connective tissue that you're allowed to use in prose. So here I am writing a very not cinematic
Yeah.
opening to my book. I mean, it's cinematic in that it's a big event,
Yeah.
but she's doing a lot of thinking and kind of moping. And I thought she has to do a certain amount of this before she can do anything else. But I also have to keep the reader with me.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a fine line.
so it was a tricky balance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I imagine. Huh.
yeah,
Well, it sounds like you pulled it
yeah.
off.
I think I did. I
Yeah.
think I did. And then other things happen. And she does have a community, whether whether she wants to or not.
Yeah. Wow. That's
So
great.
and Grace kind of talks to her, and she kind of talks to Grace.
I figured
So
that. That's
yeah,
always that's the usual, right? When
yeah,
someone
yeah,
dies. Yeah. Yeah. That's part of moving on.
right.
Um, so Elizabeth, you've been writing for a couple of decades, right? Um, you've been in
Uh,
this industry.
it's been longer than that. My first novel, I think, was published in 1984.
Okay. So a few years back.
A few years, and yes.
Well, I'm wondering like what changes you have seen since say 1984, just in the lesfic writing publishing world,
Right.
throughout that time till now.
Well, it's very, very different. And first was when I first started writing um, novels, I had been writing screenplays and had was very frustrated because people liked my writing and it wasn't selling. And I had one um, movie of the week that got optioned but not made, and then it got made as a half-hour episode of a syndicated TV show. So that
Wow.
was an interesting exercise in changing,
Whoa.
taking a
Yeah.
90-something page script and turning it into a 22-page
Ch-
script. But
chop chop.
that's a that's another podcast
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
Um, so I was the the story that got optioned but not made was A Positive Look at Death and Dying. Isn't that interesting?
We're back to that,
Which
are we?
in 1979 or
Mm-hmm.
80 was, not a hot topic.
Yeah.
Um, And my spec script that was getting me all these meetings was a lesbian drama. And so it was like, oh, well, we got lesbians and we got death and dying. Well, I'm never going to work in this town. But once I had written the death and dying one, that it was about this once close family that was torn apart by a secret where the mother was dying and they didn't want to tell the kids, and the 16-year-old daughter figures it out and learns about hospice and confronts her parents,
Mm-hmm.
So
And that's your first
was,
novel?
that was my story that got optioned
Oh,
but not made, and then was turned into this half-hour episode.
okay.
But it was very, like, after I'd written that, I couldn't just go back to coming up with ideas that I thought were going to appeal, or that whoever I was pitching stories to they thought would appeal to, a general audience or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty frustrated, and I started writing scenes not connected, but about women.
Mm-hmm.
And my partner at the time said, well, why don't you write a book? To which I responded, a book. And I wrote my first book.
That's great. And what is that first book called?
That first book is called For Keeps.
For Keeps. Huh.
And it was published by Naiad Press.
You
My
know,
first three books were all Naiad books,
I
yes.
was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
How did you get connected with Naiad?
I let's see. There was, what was it, like Writers Market? Like, I looked up all the lesbian publishers, and I either sent it or somehow I queried Naiad.
Okay.
They were the only people I contacted.
Okay.
And Barbara Greer, who was
Yes.
Naiad,
Yes.
I think she called me and she said, well, I think she wanted to know my name and what name are you going to use? And I'm thinking, well, that name, like my name, I'm going to use Elisabeth Nonas, my name. And she wanted to know how long the manuscript was, and I told her, and she told me who to send it to. And she said, tell them Granny Greer told you to send this. It was like code for whatever. So I sent it, and they published it.
Wow. Nice.
And Catherine Forrest was my editor.
You know, in my hand, I have a first edition copy of For Keeps.
Oh, my goodness.
Yep. Yep. And T.A. Corinne.
T. Corinne did the cover.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
And now it's interesting because now if you're connected to Golden Crown Literary Society, they have the T. Corinne
cover.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm very excited because Golden Crown is going to be in Albany.
That's right. That's right.
Next year.
Yeah. Yeah. In July.
Very excited.
Yeah, that's so cool. So you will attend?
I hope so.
Great.
I've reserved rooms.
Awesome.
A room.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, were you exposed to books and reading as a child? Like, how did you get into all this? I
always read, and I always read, and I think I always kind of, if something was happening, I thought of it as I would be narrating it in my head.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she didn't mind that the dog was jumping on her because she was so excited that, I don't know, whatever.
So you're always telling a story.
Yeah, but I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Okay. And how old were you when you think that that occurred to you and you started committing it to paper?
Oh, well, I think I was not one of these, oh, at 5 years old, I wrote my first novel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, I think I mostly just wrote if I had an assignment or there was something.
Mm-hmm.
There were prizes at the end of the year for fiction, for short stories. This
Oh,
was in my
cool.
grade school, and I think I would write for that. And then in college, I was an English major, but I did a thesis, creative writing thesis, and I wrote poetry,
Oh.
which the world did not lose a good poet when I switched to prose.
Ah.
Let me just say that. And it's actually, I went from poetry to thinking I wanted to do photography.
Ah.
And instead of photography, I ended up in film school. And it's interesting. Well, it's interesting to me. Screenwriting, in a way, is more like poetry than prose because it's that same, everything has to be really condensed and economical.
I could
And
see
you have to
that.
get a lot of information into,
A line.
right?
Yeah. I could see that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huh. That's really
So
interesting.
then, yeah, so then um, when I was in film school, I had to write a script. It was like, oh, now I have to take these little observations and connect them and make them into a story.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a challenge too.
Oh yeah. I'll bet.
Yeah.
That seems harder to me than writing a novel. I don't know.
Um, it's as I used to tell my students, it's it's just a different kind of hard.
Yeah.
And I also think anything I'm writing is harder than anything I could have written.
Yeah, right.
Like if I was writing a screenplay, it's like, oh, I mean, once I was sort of doing both. Um, if I'm writing a novel, I was like, oh, I wish I were writing the screenplay. Then wouldn't have to write this description.
Mm-hmm.
I could just say, it's a beautiful fall day. That's all we need.
Descriptions
But
are
then,
not easy to write either.
no, they're not easy. But if you're writing a screenplay, then you think, oh, I wish I were writing a novel because then I could explain these people's backstory rather than try to work it in a believable way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you can't have people at the altar or people, a married couple, arguing and saying, well, remember when we wrote our own vows and here we are now? It's like, who's going to say that?
Yeah, right.
you
It
know,
just doesn't happen.
right.
Yeah, yeah, that is more difficult.
And I also feel when I'm writing that when I'm at the beginning, it's like, oh, I wish I were at the end and I could just be editing this.
Oh, do you like to edit?
And I'm a good editor.
Oh,
And I think
awesome.
all those years of teaching really helped me because, I would tell my students, um, we did, we, re- it, we really taught them how to critique each other's work.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell them that the value of that is not just because these could be people you'll be working with for the rest of your career, but learning how to see what isn't working in somebody else's writing is going to help you when you go back.
Yeah.
You can't be quite as objective, but you're going to learn a lot. And so it helped me. All those years of teaching made me look at something that I'd written and go, no, what would you tell a student who wrote that?
Yes.
But as I said, we're like, wherever I am, I wish I were somewhere else. Like when I'm finally editing what I've written, it's like, oh, I'm so stuck with what I have. I wish I were at the beginning and I could be doing this completely differently.
Oh
Anyway,
no.
it's just the joys. It's just the joys of writing.
Yes. Yes. So you also, I saw that you wrote um, a book called Story Workout Book.
Workout.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exercises to help you connect to the stories that you want to tell.
So did you develop that like as a teaching tool in your like for
Well,
your
it kind of
classes?
went the other way. I had already been teaching. I had developed this class called Story, from cave paintings to emerging media.
Okay.
It was a little bait and switch because we did not do a lot about cave paintings, but it was the introductory course into this degree that we created, which was a BFA in writing for film, television, and emerging media. And the idea was to well, there were a couple of things. Introduce students to the idea that they didn't have to limit themselves to being TV writers or screenwriters, that there were all sorts of other ways to be telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
I taught writing for video games and emerging media, that was very interesting.
Oh, I'll bet.
Yeah. But so it was a couple of things. One, looking at how stories were being told, because it isn't, students were getting a degree in writing before we developed this degree, they would get one in either film writing, screenwriting, or TV writing.
Okay.
And that really didn't make sense anymore. Back in the day, if you wrote for television, you didn't write movies. And if you wrote for movies, you didn't write television. And that just doesn't apply anymore. And then there's streaming and all,
Yeah, things have
and
changed.
video games.
Yeah.
And yeah. So this was to prepare students for the world of narrative delivery as it is and as it's changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of like organized chaos, because it was getting them to look at how stories are told, but also how stories affect them and how that related to the effect that they wanted their work to have on their audience.
Okay.
So, because my big belief is that your reader or your audience, it's your connection to your story that your audience connects to, whether they know it or not.
Okay.
And so working on the syllabus for this course was the closest to actually, it was like very exciting for me. It was like writing, but I wasn't writing a story.
Mm-hmm.
But it had that same energy for me.
Yeah.
And it was really hard. And I spent a long time working on it.
Did you?
Yeah. Figuring out the syllabus and like when things were going to happen and what I wanted them to learn. And so some of it was like I had them do a media history, which was partly a way for me to get to know them and for them to get to know each other. But to think about, they had to come up, tell us what they watched, what they read, um, what they played, if they played games,
Mm-hmm.
and how, like, did they go to movies? Did they turn to movies for one kind of entertainment, or did they read for this kind of a story? Also, what they listened to and websites or virtual worlds they spent time in. But when they did that, then they could look at the list they'd come up with and did they see any patterns? Did they go for deep character studies, or did they just want to be entertained? Or do they really want to be playing video games so that they could be involved in the story? And were they surprised by what they had come up with? So that was sort of getting them starting to think about how stories affected them.
Okay. So is that all, like you took those tools and put them in this story workout book?
Oh, yeah. So basically I had my syllabus, and then I turned it into story workout, which makes it sound much easier than it was. But but I think I had done the really hard work figuring out what this course was going to be.
Yeah.
And then, they didn't have to buy the book because they had me.
Mm-hmm.
they had,
Mm-hmm.
they're still, they got the exercises.
They had the live version.
Right.
Yeah. So, Elizabeth, are you currently working on anything?
I am. And I am surprised that it is a sequel to Grace Period.
Is it really?
It is.
Is this your first
My
sequel?
Yes.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, we'll see. And I have a working title, which is Away with Words. One
Oh,
word, away, not
uh-huh.
a way. Away
Okay.
with Words. And I didn't know that I was going to, had not been my intention. Um, I thought I said what I had to say, how is Hannah going to move on with her life?
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, good. Well, we figured that out. And then I've taught workshops at the Hobart Festival of Women Writers, which is in Hobart, New York, Hobart Book Village, which is a wonderful,
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
teeny tiny town.
Yes.
But
It's
there
in
are
the
like nine or
Catskills,
10,
right?
yes, yeah, and there are
Yes.
like 9 or 10 bookstores on the main street.
Yeah, we were there
And,
last fall.
oh, well, you
Very
should
cold
come for
place.
the Festival of Women Writers. It's
And
really great.
when is that?
Well, this year it was in June.
Okay.
When it first started, it was, I think, in September, but now it's in June. There will be one in June.
Great.
And they also have an online journal. And they wanted submissions from some of the participating writers and workshop people. And turns out I wrote a story called How to Pack a Suitcase about Hannah. And I thought, isn't this sweet? Because endings are hard, and ending a novel is hard. You've spent a lot of time with these characters. And I thought, well, oh, great. Now I have this little story about Hannah. that takes place after the book. And this is my way of saying goodbye to the character. Isn't I felt very good about that.
Oh.
Um, and then a year or so later, they asked for another submission. And I wrote a story, and not about Hannah. I wrote a story, and I had my spouse read it. And my spouse is Nancy K. Bariano, who was the founding publisher and editor of Firebrand Books. And she read my short story, and she said, meh. She didn't think it was it's like, okay. And
Nice.
yeah. But she was right. She said it's kind of soft. So I thought, fine. And then so I wrote a completely different story, and imagine my surprise, it was about Hannah, called The Patient. So I took the hint that maybe Hannah was giving me, that either I have more to say about Hannah, or Hannah has more to say to me about herself.
Yeah.
And so that is what I'm working on.
That's wonderful. And
yeah,
when do you think that you're going to publish that?
I'm sorry, I think we've lost the connection. No, I haven't. I've given myself a deadline because I think that's really important. I don't think, I'm not sure how realistic it is, but the deadline is to have it finished in by the end of 2025.
Okay.
By the end of next year. And now that I have a deadline, and now that I have said it out loud,
yeah,
that's what I can work toward. And as I said, I find that really important, because otherwise, I mean, unless somebody has said, we need this by Thursday, I'm like, well, I'm working on this, and I can be very happy just working on this.
Yep.
But the deadline gives me something to aim for. And when I'm really working on it, because now I'm still writing scenes and sequences and coming up with ideas. But once it really gets going, then I can say, would it be nuts to never be finished by then? And I can adjust the deadline, but at least it gives me something to start with.
You won't just be meandering around Hobart streets looking for books.
Or stopping in at Moosewood and saying, yeah, well, I'm working on the sequel.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Being accountable.
I am really happy to hear that. Away with words. So I'm going to check in with you in around January of 26 and see what you're doing.
Check in with me. Are you going to be at Golden Crown?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't decided, actually.
Okay, well, check with me in July.
Okay, all right. If I'm there, I'll hunt you down and check it out. But Elisabeth, this is all the time we have for today, and I am just wondering if you have any parting words for our listeners.
Well, keep in touch. I have a website, elisabethnonas.com, and you can see if I'm up to anything new, find out where to find Grace Period.
And where can we find Grace Period?
Wherever fine books are sold. You can order it from Amazon. You can order it from the publisher. It is available in all ebook formats.
Great. And
Kindle, Kobo, whatever.
who is your
Um,
publisher for this book?
Rattling Good Yarns Press.
Rappling Good Yarns. Okay.
Yeah. Um, and for the writers out there, write the stories that you want to read and nourish your connections to the stories that you want to tell, because that's what's going to hook your readers.
That is great advice for our writers out there. Many of our listeners are writers themselves. So that's awesome. Well, Elisabeth, it has been great talking with you. It
This
has,
has been fun.
yeah, it's been my pleasure. And I hope that you will come back sometime. Um, Maybe when the sequel to Grace Period is ready to be published. That would be wonderful. But listeners, check out Grace Period by Elisabeth Nonas. I think that you're gonna like it. It sounds like a wonderful book and a healing book as well.
It is. Thank you, Anita. This has been my pleasure.
Yeah, so that's all the time we have for today. And I'm Anita Kelly. Thanks for joining Let's Talk About Books, baby. Until next time, may your journey be lighthearted, peace be plenty, and be safe, folks.